Have a seat. I'm Ellen Hanak. I'm the director of PPIC's Water Policy Center. And I have to say, we did not think that this was a sexy enough topic to draw a big crowd. And we're so excited that you guys are also water wonks and want to dig into it because it's a really important topic, even though it's not the most glamorous topic of accounting for water and keeping track of what we have, who has claims to it, and how we use it and where we use it. And so just excited to be able to sort of have this as a way of giving you a little bit of an overview of the research, and then having a really exciting panel discussion with some experts who are in the trenches of actually working with and needing information about water in order to manage it in its various facets. So let me I have some good notes here from people who know that I'll go off track if I don't keep track of what I have on here. So first of all, some of you may not know PPIC, Public Policy Institute of California. We are a nonpartisan think tank that we do work on various kinds of issues that are important for California. This particular team that I had works on water and related issues, but we also have other great events and reports on other topics. So if you don't know us, check out our website, and you'll find some other good stuff that you'll like. So for today's program, what you've got on your seats are a copy of the new report on water accounting for accounting for California's water, as well as just a little 2-page summary. And you've also got the speaker bios. So we're going to do short introductions of speakers just in the interest of time, but you've got more details on them there. And I think I want to just introduce a little bit to give you a sense of who's been involved in this work. First, I want to thank the funders of this work, because without their support, we wouldn't be able to do this. And they're listed up here, but I'll name them for you again. So this is the David and Lucille Packard Foundation, the S.D. Bechtel Jr. Foundation, the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, and the Water Foundation. And this effort is part of some work that we've been doing at PPIC with many of our research colleagues from around the state on really trying to learn and harvest the lessons from this extraordinary drought that California has been in, sort of seeing where are the pressure points, what's not been working as well as it needs to, and how do we improve on that. And water accounting, as you'll hear from my colleague Alvar in a minute, is one of those areas where the drought has really opened a window onto what we need to do better. So speaking of Alvar, I want to introduce the team to you. We've got a number of the authors here. So the team includes some of the veterans like Jay Lund, whom you know, and myself, and Brian Gray, who's also been involved in our work for quite a while. But it's been a massive effort, and we were very excited, those of us who are the veterans and tired and don't have as much energy anymore. We were very excited that we have some younger, more energetic members of the team who took the lead on this. So you're going to hear from Alvar in a minute, Alvar Escriva, and also Henry McCann, who is sitting next to him. Henry, and you guys stand up for a second, just so people know. So anything you don't like about the report, they're the ones. And then we Jay, we can blame Jay. All right, we'll blame Jay. Okay. Yeah, that's true. And we also had a really great team of young researchers who are not here today, who worked with us. Elisa Blanco, Bonnie Magnuson-Skills, Andy Tweet, and Yelena Yazimirovich. And so thank you to all of them. Awesome, awesome, awesome. And also thanks to about, I think it was 100 people when we added it up, all of the people who helped us with interviews, with reviews, with coming to workshops and meetings to really make this as accurate and as useful as possible. And just what you do not have on your seat is a 185-page technical appendix, which you actually are going to want to check out because it's detailed case studies of 14 places and how they do their water accounting, including California, but also the other places that Alvar is going to talk to you a little bit about. So thanks to everyone for their work on this. So what else am I going to tell you? So the report and the slides that Alvar is going to show you are also available on our website. So you can have a look at that. And this is being webcast. Hello to everybody who's online, and there will be, the video will be posted when it's ready to. So if you want to go back or share it with other folks that you think would benefit from having a look at it, that'll be available soon. And so just in terms of game plan, Alvar's going to come up, give a presentation. At that point, he'll take just a couple of clarifying questions, not sort of deep existential ones. And then we're going to have the panel discussion. They're going to talk a bit, and then the last half hour or so we're going to reserve for Q&A. And at that point, Alvar will come up, and you can have at it with the whole crew of panelists. And let's see. Later today, you're going to receive a short email with a short survey just to help us tell us how we're doing. That's really valuable for us. So please, when you get that, please fill it out, and please silence or turn off your cell phones. And I think with that, I'm going to say, Alvar, take it away.
Thank you. So, thank you, Ellen. Thanks so much. Great. So, I'm going to explain briefly the main findings of our report. It's going to be a challenge to explain 1 year of work in 10 minutes, but I'll try to. Again, I'm going to acknowledge Henry, Jay, Andy, Lisa, and Bonnie for all their work, Ellen and Brian Gray as well, because it has been a really challenge and a really tough effort. So let me start talking about our main finding. We think that California needs to improve its water management. And with that, California would be better prepared to overcome their main water challenges. So, and what's water accounting? Water accounting means understanding the balance sheet. How much water do we have? Who has claims to use it? And what is actually being used? To do that, we need to gather information, to manage information, and also to share that information just right in time to improve decision making. Here I am presenting a water information dashboard. This is for the region of Perth in Australia. So they are doing this. They implemented their standards some years ago, and they are doing this kind of fancy water balance sheets for all the regions over Australia. And why we need to improve that? Because the drought has spotlighted weaknesses in California's water accounting. We have seen how the Water Control Board has been challenged to do water allocation and curtailments during the drought because some lack of information. We have this long-term depletion of aquifers, and because of the enactment of the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, we have to bring these aquifers into balance. We have seen how the environment has been hit hard. There's not enough information of how much water do the environment need, and also we don't have enough information on water flows in the rivers. And finally, water trading that usually helps us to reduce economic costs has been stagnated the last years, and this is also because of lack of information. So we thought that a good approach for this project was to look at how other states are how other states are accounting for water, and we can learn from some lessons from there. Our study looked at 12 Western states and 2 countries, Australia and Spain. You can see here our study areas. All these places share similar challenges on water management, also similar water uses. Most of the water use is devoted to agricultural uses. And we analyze it in all these states. Ellen mentioned that we have this detailed case study analysis in our technical appendix report. We analyze their legal and institutional frameworks, their management protocols, and their information technologies. trying to get best management practices that actually we can apply in California. So, but California is kind of singular somehow. We have a really vast system, a water supply system that is physically interconnected, but institutionally fragmented. In this figure, you can say our water infrastructure, the main storage and conveyance infrastructure. We can move water from Northern California to Southern California. But in these different colors, we have all the different agencies. We have federal agencies, state agencies, local agencies involved in our management. So we also have over all these statistics, a lot of irrigation districts, over 400 urban agencies, nearly 200 priority groundwater management basins. So we think that we need integration on the information. We are doing a lot of things in California, but we need to integrate all this information. And from our analysis, we kind of graded how we are doing in the 4 main areas of water accounting. Water availability is how much water do we have. Understanding legal claims on water, understanding water use, and finally managing and sharing information. Here we can see in yellow phases, there's things that we are doing kind of well, but there's some room for improvement, and in these red phases that actually are not well represented. So you can see places or items where we have a lot of room for improvement. These are accounting gaps. In general, I can say, you can look in detail in the report, that I can say that we are doing kind of well in surface water, but we are much worse in understanding how much groundwater use and claims do we have, and also in the water assigned to the environment. Also in managing and sharing information, I have to say that we have a lot of web pages. We have a lot of information out there, probably more than most of the states that we have reviewed. But all this information is really dispersed, and sometimes it's not functional. So we can do a lot to improve that. Also, we don't have any accounting standard, as for example the Australians have, or any authoritative model to consistently analyze our system. Closing that gaps would improve the state's water management. And again, I have to say that California is making progress. We have a lot of places, instances, agencies, local, state, federal agencies, where we are doing this kind of accounting. But these are individual accountings. We need more integration on this accounting. And this better accounting will improve allocation of surface water, will enhance groundwater management, will strengthen environmental management, water management, and also expand water trading opportunities. So from now on, I'm going to present the 12 main recommendations that you have in your handout, also in the report, and that we think that are the most pressing issues for California. To improve the allocation of the scarce surface water, the problem, as I said, is that the lack of information on water availability, rights, and use is hampering water allocation and curtailments. So there are some solutions that we saw in other states. Developing comprehensive flow monitoring for river basins. We mean real-time centralized systems. For example, Colorado has this, Spain has the same, where almost from a room you can manage your system. We don't have that in California. Firming up surface claims. We released last year a report about allocating California's water, where you can look at, we are kind of behind other states on the way that we manage surface rights. We don't quantify riparian rights, and there's problems with pre-1914 in how the control board can manage them. Also, improving the estimates of net use and return flows. I'm going to point out a little bit this point because it's coming back again in the other recommendations. All of us know that when we are applying water, for example, to a farm, most of this water is used by the plants and being evapotranspirated, but there's a lot of water, there's some water being returned to the streams or to the aquifers. So we think that we need to improve our estimates. For example, Idaho is measuring surface return flows. Colorado is measuring groundwater return flows. So we could improve that, and we'll see more applications of the net water use after this. Enhancing groundwater management. We have this long-term depletion of aquifers, and these aquifers must be brought into balance under the implementation of the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act. Some solutions. We need to define groundwater accounting standards. What we are seeing is that there's all this implementation or development of groundwater sustainable agencies. These agencies have an incentive to create their own standards, and this will create costly litigation because neighboring agencies will have different accounts. So again, also developing modeling standards and authoritative models. We saw, for example, in Texas, that they have also a local management structure for groundwater. But the state has developed an authoritative model, a statewide model, that local agencies can implement themselves to manage better groundwater. Fair map claims. Groundwater use is not quantified. Groundwater claims are not quantified only in adjudicated basins in California. So the state should way how we can cap groundwater use. Groundwater capping is necessary for the implementation of SGMA. And finally, also groundwater accounting for groundwater use and recharge. And again, here, we need to know net uses. When we say accounting for groundwater use, we are not saying we need meters in all wells in California. There's techniques over there that are showing that there are other ways to measure groundwater use. Strengthening environmental water management. There's a lack of information on environmental requirements, and also we don't know exactly how much water do we have in some streams. Some solutions, monitoring flows in environmentally sensitive streams. In our research, we found that 50% of streams where we have critical habitat are not measured in California. We don't have streams in these gauges. So we should improve this monitoring. Defining environmental water budgets. We have seen in other places, Australia, but also local places, like in the Yuba River, they have an agreement when they have defined how much water the environmental need, does the environmental need. So defining this budget is necessary, and it's not only about water, about the amount of water, it's about timing and the spatial variability of the water necessities. And finally, also consolidating information on water availability and ecological indicators. This refers to the picture. We have been, as a success story, we have been successfully managing water for water birds during the latest drought, because good information on good spatial and temporal information. It's about timing as well. And finally, we need to expand water trading opportunities. As I said before, water markets have been stagnated the last years. And that is not helping us because with more trading, we could reduce the economical costs of droughts. So as solutions, we have to clarify how much water is tradable. And this, again, is net water use. We have to know how much net water use and to avoid harming the environment or other users. And also, we have to increase public information on water trading. As a good example, the Victoria Water Register in Australia is showing almost in real time water prices, water trading opportunities, and water volumes. So we don't have that information here in California. Just to conclude, again, modernizing California's water accounting will help us to overcome this pressuring management challenges. So we need to provide more accurate and timely, especially timely for improved decision-making assessments. How much water is there, water availability, and who has claims to use it, and what is actually being used. We need to fill these accounting gaps that we have identified, but also we have to consolidate information that it's actually being collected, and we already have this information. And we have to make this data useful. And making this data useful is providing the information for the decision makers right in time and right in the place that they need it. With all this, we think that we would make the most of the available resources. And with that, I'm happy to take some clarifying questions, but as Ellen said, we'll have a Q&A session later, so more in-depth questions for later. Thank you.
In the we on?
Yeah.
Okay. In the regulations that were generated from the Sigma Act, were some comments about overdraft and now archaic term safe yield. And the statement was that overdraft is okay as long as in the future there's recharge of the aquifer to make up for the overdraft. That becomes, it seems to me, a real measurement problem. Mm-hmm. But it's in the regs. And so what do we do with that?
Actually, as in this last drought, we have seen that overdrafting can help us. It's a buffer to help us during droughts. But we have to be sure to recharge the basins later. So our approach is that, of course, we need measurements, we need balances, balance sheets to know how much are we using and how much are we able to recharge later. So, again, the point is having the right information and in a timely manner to address this basin scale management.
The Department of Water Resources spends quite a bit of time and money on the Bulletin 160 series update of the California Water Plan. Now, where is that falling down and not providing the information you're talking about?
Sorry, can you repeat the question again? The last part.
Yeah, where is that falling down that you're not getting the information that you'd like to know as well as it can be developed?
Yeah. The issue with the water plan for us, what we need is timely information. We need information to make decisions. Information just in the time that we need it. So it's, the water plan for our understanding, it's taking have other objective. It's not this objective. It's making a plan for the future. We need information right in time for example, for the control board to make curtailments right in time, even for farmers to make their decisions about how much water they have for next year. So it's for us, there are different things. Okay, I think we can go for the panel. Thank you so much.
Thank you. While they're sitting, I'm just going to tell you, one of the things we talk about in the report is who are the users, or we call them actually clients of water accounting. And we talk about this as being a very broad group of folks. It includes regulatory agencies, sort of agencies that provide oversight. It includes operational agencies that manage water. It includes water right holders, water users, stakeholder groups, and the elected officials and the general public. And the idea being that each of them needs aspects of this water information for being able to do the jobs they do, or to make sure that our officials are doing the jobs that they're supposed to be doing. And so we thought we can't cover all of the whole vast area of needs and how people use the information, but we could try to give a sampling in this panel of folks who are coming at this from some different places. And so with that in mind, I'm going to introduce the panel. So right here next to me is Lance Eckhart, who is with the Mojave Water Agency, a big local, maybe a regional water agency is kind of what we want to call it. So Lance is the director of planning there, and I saw him give a presentation to a broad group of really water users and stakeholders a couple months ago down in the high desert. And behind him, there was a screen that kept showing a bunch of ones and zeros, like computer. And I thought, this guy really gets the idea of data, and he uses it in all kinds of very practical ways. So I was excited that he could join us to talk a bit about what they're doing, and just to anticipate for a second, Mojave is one of the places that is adjudicated, and so they're a little bit ahead of the game compared to a lot of our basins in terms of the kind of management that they need to do. So I thought that'd be very interesting to hear. Tom Howard, many of you here in Sacramento know Tom. Tom is a veteran with the State Water Resources Control Board. He's been the executive director for a while, including during the entire time of this drought. And Tom is going to have a chance to tell you whatever of the many, many reasons why they need and use data, the ones that are most on his mind today. But it covers pretty much the whole span of the list that Alvar made of sort of things that we need better information for, that the drought has exposed to us. And then last but not least is Maurice Hall, who is also really a groundwater guy too. So we kind of, Tom, you're flanked by groundwater guys here. And Maurice has had many hats, but he's kind of here wearing his hat as a senior manager at an Environmental Defense Fund. And he, before that, here in California, was also with the Nature Conservancy. And in both of those capacities, sort of working in the NGO environment to really try to improve water management for the benefit of the economy and nature. And so we thought that he would be able to provide some perspectives from the stakeholder side of things. So I asked these guys first to just kind of each kick off with a little bit of an overview on sort of what they think the most important issues are from where they sit in terms of tackling water information and accounting. And so maybe Lance, we'll just start with you and we'll work our way down.
Yeah, just a few words. We've been adjudicated in our area it's about 5,000 square miles of Southern California, high desert. We're always in a drought, so it's kind of this is nothing new to us. This is kind of our standard operating procedure. We're very fortunate that I'd say practically 100% of our water is groundwater. We've got very prolific groundwater basins, but those prolific groundwater basins have been overdrafted for the last half a century. The adjudication kicks in, and slowly, we ramp down back to safe yield. Also, I want to also kind of tell the audience to manage your expectations. For a lot of areas of the state that are in overdraft, it's probably going to take a generation to right the ship to sustainability. And the way you do that really is by collecting good data and making decisions. We have a mantra around the office, which is you cannot manage what you do not understand. Water is precious, but if you can't put a box around what precious means, you can't really manage it, you can't talk about it, you can't trade it, but you can sure as hell fight about it. Okay, so it's extremely important to be able to quantify how much of this precious resource you have, how much is going in, and how much is going out. One of the other things that we've learned over the last couple decades is that you have to be fairly courageous in applied science. And what this means is you have to make decisions. The body of knowledge is continually imperfect. Your enemy is uncertainty. That's what gets us all riled up, and that's what we fight about. What's going to happen? I don't know. What does this mean? I don't know. You're going to basically skew it to your side of the agenda. The other person's going to skew it to their side, and no one's really talking about real data if they don't have it. You put data in the room, you lay it on the table, you have something to talk about. So really quantifying how much is going in and is going out is incredibly important. I'm going to just give you one quick example, and I'm going to basically pass the baton here to the right. Things like how much water is leaving the basin. This seems like an insurmountable type of a request. How much are people pumping? You can really do it, but the data is not great sometimes. You can put meters on people's wells. You're going to get a lot of pushback. If you don't get meters, you can use electrical records. Just like every tank of gas, you get 300 miles of driving out of your car. You pull as many kilowatts with this pump, it's this much water. We use that all the time. In the absence of that, you can fly over their house with an infrared camera, okay? Whip out a textbook on what crop you think that they're growing, get a consumptive use, and you tell them, this is your number. And if you don't like it, you can give us your electrical records with a pump test, or you can put a meter on it. And so that's kind of, there's ways to keep moving forward. And you can even do it on a very, almost by domestic well basis if you hire a bunch of interns from the local university and they go through and have this soul crushing exercise of taking the GIS and going parcel by parcel. But you can do it, and again, it's another line on your ledger. Some of those lines in your ledger aren't great. It's okay. The body of knowledge is always imperfect. Keep moving, keep talking, keep studying. Okay, sir.
Thank you. Very good points. So I looked at the report before I came. My initial take on it was I agree with the assessment of key gaps. I agree with the policy recommendations, and so with that I could just end, but I assume that Ellen wanted something a little more than just a simple statement that I agree with it. So I thought I'd talk about it in the context of the water rights program that we're trying to manage for many years. And I often get the question, how would we improve the water rights program? What's a functional water rights program? And I've been saying there are 4 things that are in a functional water rights program. 1 is that you have to measure and report everything. 2 is that you need to establish public trust flows. 3 is that you need to either adjudicate or develop some sort of legally binding agreements that clearly lay out how much water people have a right to and what their priority is in relation to other people in the basin. And 4, you have to enforce the previous 3 provisions. And that's, as far as I'm concerned, in my very reductionist viewpoint, a fully functional water rights system. And when I take those 4 measures and I compare them to the recommendations, the first 10 recommendations are all, basic, I don't know how you'd frame it, restatements, different ways to characterize the first 3 of these recommendations. So I'm fully on the same page as what the group has said, and I think it's well worth the state working hard to bring those into fruition. But let me just talk just for a little bit about those 3 categories that I talked about. The first is measuring everything, and quite honestly, I like to look at things from the optimistic perspective first, and I have to say over the last 6 years, we've been huge improvements from where we were 6 years ago. 6 years ago, if you had a pre-1914 or a riparian right, and we asked you to file a statement, we'd get about half the people, and they were required by law to file these statements, about half would reply. And of those, many of them would just check and say, yeah, I took some water, and didn't fill out how much water they took. And so our general approach was to package it all up in a box and seal it tightly and put it in a corner. The information might as well have been on the dark side of the moon for all the good it did anyone. And so, but now, after 2010, the penalties were established. Reporting became commonplace. We well over 90%. And we're reporting it out on the internet. And so, it's just a huge improvement. And when I look at that, it's hard for me to get, I like to think that we're really making a difference in that regard. But there's still a lot of blank spots here. Well, the mention was made of the in-stream flows. We do need a lot more gauging. Sigma is, obviously we need to get more information on groundwater recharge. And we need net use, that is return flows. So we're getting pretty good with the diversion data, but all the other pieces are still pretty weak. The second thing is public trust. That is sort of improving as well, just so that at least from my perspective, when I talk about public trust, we do have some public trust flows below major dams. We have some public trust flows in the Delta. I think a lot of people think a lot of these public trust flows need to be amended, but it's not a complete blank slate. However, that's a pretty small fraction of the amount of water that should have public trust flows out there, and it's pretty much non-existent everywhere else. So, obviously improvements are necessary. I think we are going to be getting, I was very pleased when the governor included public trust flows on some tributaries as part of the Clean Water Action Plan. And so there was an acknowledgement from the state for the first time that I saw that this was a priority for the state to establish public trust flows. And we've also been getting some funding at the Water Board for public trust flows that in the past had never been there. It's just in the last few years we have some dedicated groups. I see Erin Ragazzi here, who heads up our public trust functions at the Water Board. Yes, she raised her hand over there in case people are interested. And also Sigma obviously had some mention of public trust flows in it, and that's a big step forward. But there are big obstacles to setting public trust flows. And probably the largest one is the institutional obstacle. I mean, it's really tough to move people off the status quo. And status quo, people are willing to fight for what they have now, and the ability to try to move them off of that is very difficult. There are procedural issues that are very difficult. We have to set water quality objectives. We have to do water right proceedings. We have to do CEQA. These are multiple year projects. The Yuba Accord was mentioned from the day that, and I was involved in that for many years. It took us 19 years from the day we decided to start that process to us actually crossing the finish line. And the fact that the Water Board did adopt objectives is what broke down the institutional barriers that allowed people to come to agreement finally after the Water Board. So, you know, these things are, you should not underestimate the difficulty of setting in-stream flows. Another thing is this whole issue of surface and groundwater interaction we're dealing with nowadays. Groundwater pumping is just another way to divert surface water in most streams in the state. And yet trying to figure out how the responsibility for public trust flows should extend into groundwater basins is incredibly difficult. We're now doing starting some modeling work, and I tell you, it's very expensive type of work to do, and it's all very site specific. So what I'm saying is that if we were using the existing process to set public trust flows, we have centuries of work in order to get public trust flows established in California for its important streams. So we need to think of a new model. And, you know, there are two approaches you can take for a new model. One is that you find other parties force other parties to take up the burden. It's a Sigma type approach, and it's mentioned in the report as a recommendation, and I think it's a good one. I think we have to worry a little bit about the incentives here, but you know, probably we can work through that. The other is to lighten the burden that we have to meet in order to set public trust flows. And you've seen that in a couple of instances where we've actually moved quickly to set public trust flows. During the drought, we had an executive order, and so using that, we were able to quickly set some minimal public trust flows on Mill Deer and Antelope Creeks, something that would have otherwise have taken, you know, many years to accomplish. We did in a couple of months. There's marijuana legislation this year that came about, and it requires us to establish interim flows for the purpose of regulating marijuana cultivation. So it's a small subset of the uses out there, but the flows, you know, I think our intent is in 8 or 9 months from now, we'll have what we refer to as interim flows established for literally hundreds of streams in California. So if you remove a lot of the institutional and procedural barriers, we are capable of moving quickly. The last thing I'd mention is adjudication. We have an example of an adjudication here to my left, which is great, but California, at least the Water Board, has pretty much quit doing adjudications. Last one we did was in 1989 on San Gregorio. There's really an incredibly large need around the state for these types of things, and there just isn't much progress being made. But in a few areas, especially where groundwater is the principal issue, there is some progress. And in closing, all I'd like to say is that, you know, while I agree with all these recommendations, it's a huge lift. You know, we shouldn't underestimate the cost and the magnitude of trying to achieve these. But considering the fact that you know, we're in a circumstance of unfortunately changing conditions, we're going to need to have a robust water rights system, and right now that's not really in place. And with that, I'll turn to Maurice.
Thank you. It's great to have the opportunity to be here and share my perspective. The Environmental Defense Fund in our water work, we're interested in managing our water and meet the needs of our communities and our farms while also meeting the needs of nature. And I guess the first big point that I want to make is if you want to maintain the status quo, keep doing what you've been doing in the past, and this tees off something that Tom said, You don't really need a lot of information to do that. Everyone sort of knows how to do what they've been doing, but when you're going to ask people to change, and you make some changes, then you need good information on which to make the changes, to figure out what the change should be, and then to track your changes and make sure that they're having the result that you wanted. And in our California water world and across the West, we now know these last few years have really heightened our awareness that we're going to have to change some things, and we're going to be demanding some changes from a lot of different people. And these things, they're going to be painful. They're going to be, it's going to disrupt people's lives in some cases. It's going to disrupt a lot of economic activity, and it's also going to cost a lot. So if we're going to make these changes, we have to be able to justify them, justify the cost, explain clearly why we have to make the change, what the change should be, and agree on those changes. And so we need good information to do this. And that gets to the point of sort of the urgency of this issue and the timeliness of the work here that PPIC is doing to highlight what we need to do, what actions we need to take. This upgrading of our water information system it's really hugely important, and we need to really align ourselves around these great recommendations, and we need to do it quickly to mobilize. On the point of what's most important, I thought the report does a great job of distilling what is a huge amount of information and needs and a lot of details that have traditionally been the world of the water wonks. Into something that's digestible, although there's still a lot of things on the list. So it is a big lift. With respect to what's most important, it's difficult to say. I've been involved in a lot of different analyses on water, and you don't, almost any direction you head, it's not long before you start bumping into something where either the information is inadequate, more likely there's some information but you don't know where it is and you can't get to it. And so I think consistent with the kind of overarching recommendation of the PPIC report is that first and foremost, we really need to modernize our accounting system, the way we track and assemble data, and adopt, and along with that is adopting a common framework. And that's something we can move forward on, at least adopting the framework. We can move forward on that pretty quickly. That said, transitioning all the systems to match that framework is a lot bigger effort. More specifically, a few points. Information is woefully inadequate on groundwater. This point's already been made in much of the state. Mojave's much further along than most of us. There was probably a huge investment in figuring out what was going on during the adjudication. So we're really behind in understanding how groundwater behaves, and there's a lot of different aspects of that. These groundwater sustainability agencies are forming now. They're figuring out how to organize themselves and get their feet under them, and they're going to have a really difficult job. And so we need to start right now to equip them to do the job that we're asking of them, and so that by the time they get to putting their plans together, they're further along than they are now on the information. So the need in groundwater is urgent and big. You may not think of groundwater as an environmental interest, but in fact, it's a huge part of our system, and it affects every other part of our system. And so it really is important that we get this under control, and the data needs for that are huge. EDF is very interested in the idea of healthy water exchange systems, trading systems, but these transactions can do a lot for us, and we believe there are ways to build environmental needs into transaction systems so that the environment can benefit, and so that the disadvantaged communities that so often get the bad side of new actions can be protected. But to have trading systems, you have to know what you're trading. You have to be able to track that. You have to have open information so that the people who are buying and the people who are selling, trading, know what there is available. And we need to make these systems accessible to a wider range of participants than they've really been accessible, than have been able to access them in California. And so The suite of recommendations in the report that surround water trading systems is really, really important. And then a fundamental linchpin to the point that's been made already by Ellen and Tom is information about environmental needs of water and the environmental beneficiaries of water. Where are the fish? When are the fish there? As we tighten the system and we manage and we make these changes that I'm talking about, we need to be able to specifically put the water where it needs to be for the fish and wildlife, and we need to be able to defend the actions that we are making to support those wildlife. One last point I'll make is not really addressed in the report. It wasn't the intent of the report, but it's something that's really important. Tom touched on it as well, and that is having good data systems is really expensive. But we've got to have them. Our whole economy, everybody in the state depends on our water system, and it's going to cost us to understand it, monitor it, and manage it well. And so in a parallel path, as we shape up what we need to do to improve our data systems, we also need to be working on a parallel path to figure out how to pay for it over the long term so that we're not trying to fund it from bond measure to bond measure, but it's an integral part of our system. I can assure you that if someone manufactured the water that we use, there would be really good monitoring systems in place, and they would be spending the money to do that. Well, thankfully the water comes without having to be produced or manufactured, but the system supplies every aspect of what we do in the state, and we are going to have to pay for it. So I urge those who agree with me to let's get together and figure out how to put our shoulders to that issue and try to match up the funding to the data needs that we have. Thank you.
Thank you, Maurice. Lance, I was going to ask you a question, but I saw you writing down a note, so I think you might have some.
I'm going to tee off of
thoughts.
Maurice's.
Yeah.
You know, you're either going to pay now or pay later on collecting the right kinds of data. And it's, you know, you've got to collect the right kinds of data at the right frequency. Everybody wants this really cool, tricked out model that's going to be the holy grail for your basin. It takes years. It's basically garbage in, garbage out. If you don't have the good data sets to put into a model, you've got no business putting a model together and spending that money. You've got to basically do the boots on the ground, meat and potatoes, get monitoring programs in place, know what your surface flows are at the right places, the right frequency. How does that play out with groundwater levels? How much is going out? What do you think's going back in? Yada, yada, yada. All those parts go into a model. And it is expensive, and it's incredibly time consuming. And one of the things, you know, we talked about the really expensive prospect of putting these scientific tools and programs together to monitor a basin. Once you're adjudicated, you've got that. Well, that's not really true. That means when you adjudicate, you walk into court, and the judge says, you and your water rights are going to be this, and you're going to live with it, and usually your water rights are this, and the safe yield is this, and then everybody ramps down over a period of years, kind of like Sigma. It takes about 2 decades to really work their way out of the system. So you're still overdrafting during that time, trying to get down to safe yield. It's typically how that works. And there's a lot of fighting, and there's a lot of backbiting, and there's a lot of there's false assumptions in the adjudication. And so when do you do the science? After you adjudicate, because otherwise everybody's just throwing paper at each other. And so you're either going to pay for the science, or you're going to go back to court and talk about things that aren't really real. They're just a Christmas wish list of what you want your water rights to be. So it's very, very important that the folks find value in really understanding their resources and understand that it's going to be a very significant investment that creates a tremendous amount of value and certainty and the ability to make really good decisions for not only business but environmental decisions for everybody down the line. Or you can just say, you know what, I'm mad today, and you just throw a bunch of money at a bunch of lawyers. And ultimately, it's going to cost you more in the long run because you're going to come back and be having to do the science eventually anyway. So it's expensive, but you're going to, you pay now or pay later.
Follow up on this, Lance. So, I mean, you guys did have the actual formal adjudication. It's an interesting one, I think, for Sigma because unlike a lot of the adjudications in California, which are really urban areas and so just sort of cities figuring out how to manage that, you guys actually do have a lot of ag uses.
Yeah, absolutely.
So in that sense, there's some there's some commonalities with more what we see in the Central Valley, say. You've also, you kind of set the cap, you've been ramping down, but you've also instituted some trading. And that's one of the things that we sort of say, with good information, that could be helpful for other basins. So just wonder if you could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, our adjudication's about 3,500 square miles, our adjudicated area of our 5,000 square mile service area. And so that's got multiple groundwater basins that are connected, but not very connected. So we've got trading programs in each of these groundwater basins that are kind of an umbrella over the adjudication is an umbrella over these individual groundwater basins. And so you can trade in the same groundwater basin. For example, a city is over pumping their safe yield, and they either have to buy water from the state water contract, we have to import it when it's available to make the basin whole again, even it out, or they can pay a farmer that year. Let's say alfalfa prices are really low, and the farmer says, well, how much are you going to pay me not to farm? And they'll just trade that water. Now, it's got to be within the same basin, because this is a bucket over here, and the adjudication covers many different buckets geologically, and you can't trade with a guy that's over here, because that's just taking water out of this basin, not really putting it in this basin. So you start to get a problem of out of balance. So we have a lot of trading, but it's based on really good understanding of how our groundwater basins work. Now, within that basin, we treat it like a bucket, and you can go back and forth, and it's very much a free market, and that works very, very well. It's the underpinnings of our adjudication. We still have ag. We still have areas of overdraft that are ramping down to safe yield. It's unpleasant. It's changing people's lives, and the more nimble farmers out there are moving from fodder crops like alfalfa and into things like orchards, nut trees, and things like that, that use less water, knowing how much our safe yield, how much we've got, and making potentially a lot more money. So they're starting to make these business decisions, which are very, very tough for a lot of the agriculture community. If you've been farming grass for generations out in the desert, moving into orchards is a really big leap. But the idea is that they can still be rural, we keep our rural character, still make a good living, and just use a lot less water along the way. So again, that's really the underpinnings of our adjudication was basically based on a free market transfer of water back and forth to highest and best use. Without it, we wouldn't have an adjudication at all.
Thanks. Tom, Tom, I want to come back to you and say, I mean, you listed, some of the things, some of the progress that's been made over the last, really since the 2009 legislative package and some of the changes that came in there, say on diversion reporting and so on, and talked about sort of some of the different kinds of management actions that you guys have been undertaking during the drought and thinking about things going forward. If you look at kind of the set of sort of takeaways from what the board has been contending with on different fronts during this drought, does one rise to the top as sort of this is a really good model for where we have to go?
Well, I'm not sure I'd say we have something that I'd call a very good model. I think the takeaway that I have deals to a great extent with what this report deals with, which is that in order for us to manage in times of shortage, we have to have much better information than we have now. I mean, we've been trying to, we for the first time since 1977, we've been doing curtailments, and of course there's a lot of pushback on that sort of thing, and because parties are not used to facing those kind of decisions from the board, and they have to be totally supported, and that type of thing, it requires substantial information. In order for us to make those kind of decisions, we did have to use some assumptions because the information just wasn't there. So, as things get drier and drier, I think what we'll continue to learn is that you have to have better information in order to manage the resource that's still available.
Maurice, you gave a long list of things that you think are important to do, and I'm not going to disagree with any of them, but I'm going to ask you to kind of pick a favorite child in kind of what you'd want to roll your sleeves up on first.
Oh, boy. Have to pick between my children, huh? I think I can't necessarily say that it's most urgent, but one of the things I think that we should get alignment on and move forward with fairly quickly is a standard groundwater modeling system. And this really gets to the job that the groundwater sustainability agencies are going to have. But establishing a standard protocol and building that information base that you need in advance at the beginning, as Lance is talking about, for the understanding, we can go down that road of pretty fair ways with existing information, and as long as there's some certainty or some confidence that everyone's going to be looking at the same database and using it the same way. So I think that's a really important one, and that's described in the report. Another,
Now he's picking another child.
yeah,
here.
I'm gonna pick another child quickly.
You have two kids at home, right?
Actually, not at home anymore.
Well, all right, but you have two kids, so you're right. He's used to not having to pick one because the other one will get mad. All right,
Yep.
your second child, okay.
And that is more detailed information about the environmental conditions. We have a beautiful example is a river that the Nature Conservancy is doing a lot of work with on the coast, the Navarro River, and there was one stream gauge on the outlet to the Navarro River, and there's 4 or 5 different major forks of that river, and there's endangered coho salmon in that river. And so having enough information at different points to begin to manage our water in very specific ways, which is what we have to do in the conditions of over-allocation and full allocation, is be much more specific about how we manage the water. And in order to do that, we need more specific information about where the wildlife is, what the water conditions are that the wildlife is seeing. They're seeing the stream conditions, and we need to know what those conditions are in real time.
Great. All right, I think, Alvar, I'm going to grab a chair. Your chair is here. All right. We're going to ask Alvar to join, and we're going to move into your turn to ask these folks questions. So I think we've got colleagues that have mics. There's Kelly with a mic. I see Spreck with his hand up.
Thank you, Spreck Rosecrans, Restore Chechi. I wanted to ask a little bit about the opportunity to make change once you have all this information, if you want to move water from one use to another or one place to another. There are numerous physical and institutional limitations. This isn't electricity where we have an independent system operator which handles the institutional end, and the physical ability to move water is, of course, very challenging. Right now, for example, the city of East Palo Alto wants to build some affordable housing, and you may have heard there's a housing crunch in the Bay Area. It's kind of expensive, and they're told they can't build unless they get some more water, and their neighbors aren't so sure they want to give up their limited allocation, and so there's various interconnections between folks. Years ago, somebody wanted to, buy up water rights in Kern County and transfer that to the Bay Area, and they had a Rube Goldberg way of doing that theoretically would have worked, but some of the water managers on the in-between didn't want to do that, maybe for good reasons. So does this whole finding information, to what extent does improving the monitoring and knowing how the water's used allow us to make the changes we might want to make in where water ends up?
Who wants to take a crack at that?
Well, I'd only briefly say that, never underestimate the institutional barriers for moving water from one use to another. That, there are procedural barriers, institutional barriers, physical barriers, and it's a big, big lift to move water around from one use to the other. The status quo is a very, very powerful factor that needs to be overcome. And So, you have to decide that you've got, there has to be will, basically, that to push this thing, to push it through. There has to be the will that the change is needed, and that, these barriers are going to be overcome one way or another. But you shouldn't underestimate them.
But clearly it can work. It's worked in other parts of the world where you guys have used the Australia example extensively in your paper, and none of the Mojave adjudication is another example. You can't do any of these types of trades or creative deal making or look for win-wins if you can't put a box around what you're even talking about. So I think if you can define it, then you can have a conversation. If you can't define it, everybody retreats to their corners and the whole thing is just too scary. So you can have a principled negotiation, a principled discussion based on facts, and then just go from there. In the absence of that, the status quo will stay put.
I'll just add on the Australian example, which I know we sometimes people get tired of hearing about Australia by fifth year of a drought, because we've been talking, all of us, a lot about Australia. The reason that their water market is so fluid is that they did all this legwork in advance on clarifying the claims and on clarifying the environmental flows and what the rules were for trading. If I'm just your neighbor, I can trade more of my water than if you're far away, and you've got to make sure that you're not having negative impacts on stream flow and those kind of things. So that's all known. That's why they can approve deals in a matter of hours or days, whereas some of ours take years because we don't have that underlying thing. So each time it's got to be a case-by-case effort. Graham.
Yeah, Graham Fogg, UC Davis. I enjoyed the panel and enjoyed reading through the report. Every panelist mentioned the problem of expensive. My thought was, my goodness, expensive compared to what?
Yeah.
California has been able to defer paying much attention to groundwater management because of the fantastic investments of billions of dollars that it's done over the decades in surface water storage and the ability to wheel water up and down the state. So my reaction is the kinds of expenses we're talking about, which are largely in the context of groundwater, are a drop in the bucket. And to me, it's like saying, I'm going to drive this car for 20 years and not change the oil, and then in 20 years later, all of a sudden you have to replace the engine and a lot of the moving parts. And oh yeah, it's expensive in that context, but it's basically deferred maintenance. So it's like maintaining highways, bridges, but we just haven't done the maintenance for a long time. We haven't done the footwork. Texas, built all these models of every major aquifer. I think they spent less than $30 million, but now all their groundwater management agencies have that infrastructure of investment that they don't have to charge so much for making that investment. So I think maybe it looks expensive, but it's because of us in our history that it's expensive.
Well, there's something to think about. Us as scientists and engineers and technical people, one of the things that became very, very evident in the drought, it's a lot of mixed messages, like a lot of Southern California is managed okay. There really was water because I live in a drought. It's nothing new for us. And yet we have to conserve. So there's a lot of messaging issues. And it really brings to the forefront this discussion of value and people's perception of water not being very valuable. And we realize as scientists and engineers, we're terrible at marketing. We have not done a really good job showing the public the value on really understanding the science and the technical aspect of resource management and really celebrating that, because it really keeps the whole economy, the fluid of the economy moving. It is the lubricant. And so that's maybe another takeaway, is that we just have not done a great job showing the value of resource management and what that means for us and how much big of an asset that really is. We just haven't done it to the degree we really need to do it. Thus, it's expensive when it really might not be expensive at all.
In response to Graham's wording there, what it is expensive as compared to what we're spending to do it now. And so it's expenditures that we're not used to making, or at least not at the level that it needs to be made. Compared to the value of water and what water supports in the economy, it is not that expensive. When it comes to groundwater management, for instance, you think of you didn't have to build a groundwater basin. You have this big giant natural basin there, and you don't really have to pay to maintain it or build it. You just have to pay to monitor it and manage it and pay a little attention to it. So overall, it's not that expensive, but we're not used to paying for it. We need to get used to paying for it at the right level. And compared to the value that it brings, it is, I agree, a pretty small expense.
I wanted to add, I think that you brought this point before, and Graham now. I'll just put 3 examples about costs on how expensive can be this compared with other things. The first thing is about accounting standard for GSAs. If we don't do accounting standard for GSAs, we'll have really costly litigation in the future, because everyone will be doing their own accounts, so they'll start to fight. Second one, models, groundwater models. If any groundwater sustainable agency, I don't want to blame consultants, I have been a consultant before. If any groundwater sustainable agency hires a consultant firm to build a new from scratch groundwater model, it's a lot of money. The state, for example, Texas, develop a basic groundwater model, and then the locals are applying this model with consultants. It can work. And the third things about costs and expenses. It's about, we have been hearing from farmers, and this is about the environmental water budgets. There's a lot of cost about uncertainty. Defining environmental budgets, even that they can have less water at the end, but if they have much more certainty, they can take actions, they can make decisions that can be cheaper for them in the long term. So these are 3 points about costs that we thought that were really important for our report.
And just to give you an order of magnitude, so Graham, thanks for mentioning the Texas example. And so $30 million, Texas is not quite as big as California, but it's a pretty good comparison in terms of size. And they have a similar kind of groundwater law approach, because they're also relying on locals to develop the plans and do the management. So let's say, 30 million to get that going. California annually spends $31 billion on our water system overall. And a lot of that is raised through water rates. So the state provides a chunk of that, maybe 12, 13%. The Fed's a tiny bit. Most of it is funded locally. So, that's 1,000 times less what you're talking about there for an actually multi-year effort probably. So in the scheme of things, we're not talking ginormous. And then look at the size of our economy, over $2 trillion. In the scheme of things, we ought to be able to find a little bit more money to do these kind of things. But it's about marketing, guys. You gotta get some marketing people to explain to people why those models are useful. Kelly, yeah.
So are you saying 31 million for the data collection piece alone, or is the price tag higher than that? Because I would presume that it would be higher than that.
Your question is about the authoritative model, the sort of standard models?
My question is for the objective of what you're trying to achieve in terms of data collection and data network water usage, which you're all as the first element of what should be captured in order to properly figure out what to do next. How much do you think it would cost for the entire state of California to do the proper data capturing component? Are we talking about 31 million, hundreds of millions, billions, tens of billions? How much?
I'm going to use a lifeline here for our friend Jay Lund, who has tenure and is allowed to say whatever he wants. No, because it's a good question, and we did not come up with an estimate of that because it's a whole separate new exercise, I think, to do it detailed.
The answer is 42. I'm just not sure what the units are. I think with the expense, I think the thing to really step back and realize is we are spending most of that cost already. Every significant water system is developing its own SCADA system where they collect all the information about their irrigation district, how much water is flowing through every pump, through every diversion. Your urban water users have tremendous data that they're collecting. What we're not spending money on is how to make that data collection, which is done at the local level, useful for the regional and statewide levels. So most of the expense of this system is already being paid for, with a few standards that might come out of the state board on how do the SCADA systems have to report back, and into what larger framework do they report back, and how do we govern and pay for the larger framework. That's really the expense. And that, I would guess that should be done, maybe on the order of $10 million a year or something like that if you had enough malice and forethought to do it right.
That's it? That's cheap. You can really do that.
I think it should be relative, yeah.
The data,
But the data collection, the locals have to do that anyway.
Yeah.
Right, for their own management. What's really lacking is a common state accounting framework to bring that in, and then some of the enforcement and follow-up that you have to do to make sure that people are reporting honest numbers, and that you flagged where people put an extra zero or didn't put in the right zero, move the decimal place in the root. So there are some expenses, but I think if you did it with enough malice of forethought, you could probably have it on the order of $10 million a year.
And there's probably also some investments that need to be made too. I mean, I think as Maurice was mentioning, in some places people haven't started to really do the detailed groundwater monitoring and measurement. And what Tom talked about in terms of some of the environmental flows, there's some legwork to do there. I don't know, Tom, do you have thoughts if you were going to present a budget for over the next 5 years, really getting major progress on environmental flows? What would you want?
I don't think I have a good estimate of that right now. Right now, using the existing model, it's a very big number, just because, literally, it takes us, well, if you use the Yuba example, it took us 19 years and a number of people working on it and contract money, and, so it was millions and millions of dollars for one watershed. But that's because we have a flawed model to develop these types of things, and so we need to amend the model as well. I mean, the part of the problem is not that this is all so expensive. The problem is that you need to get somebody to appropriate it. And it's not money that's being appropriated now. And so from there, when they look at it, they look at this as a new expense, and it's difficult to get appropriations for this type of thing. Even though I agree completely, in the long run, it is a good investment. You will get returns that far exceed what you spend, but you have to appropriate money today to do that.
Yeah, I want to push back a little bit on this, because and reinforcing what Tom was just saying, with respect to the value that this brings, it isn't expensive. But if you take the examples across the state of the areas that are doing the best job of management, they're spending considerably more on collecting their data and analyzing the data and communicating that data to their constituencies than those districts or those areas maybe where there's not a district and there's no one spending any money on it. And so there is a significant incremental cost and no real funding stream to fill that cost. And so developing those funding streams and figuring out how we're going to support those investments while the organizations and the entities that are going to be conducting that work are getting themselves organized and figuring out what they're going to do. And this is especially relevant in the groundwater case. It's a pretty significant challenge. I mean, you could start with this great list of ideas that are laid out here in our PPIC report, and it's a pretty big lift, and a big part of that lift is figuring out how to pay for it. We've got lots of good engineers and scientists around who can figure out how to do some of these things, but someone's going to have to charge them with that and pay for their time.
Michael. Oh, sorry. Okay. And then Michael after. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm Steve Baker, Operation Unite. Sort of a tag on to this. Tom, I think you mentioned earlier that you got to have a will out there to make these changes. Well, right now, the groups don't trust each other. The will's not there. And that's why you don't have this distribution of local data to the more regional level, unless they absolutely have to. but that's not my question. My question is related to surface water, groundwater. Given enough time, surface water and groundwater are connected. So how are we going to do that here? Will it be like Colorado where they say if it takes more than 100 years, we're going to say they're not connected. But if it takes less than 100 years, it's tributary, it is connected, and you have to follow surface water rights. How are we going to do it here? Or how do you, at least, I mean, nobody has a crystal ball, but what do you think is going to happen?
Well, like you say, nobody has a crystal ball, and I think you're going to end up with some sort of rules that get applied. In Colorado, they were applied overall. I think we might end up with different rules in different basins. But ultimately, if we're going to return surface water flows to systems where we've got groundwater pumping that is, causing disconnection of the stream, we have to be in a position of controlling the groundwater extractions. And that's why I raised the issue in the first place, is that we're in such an early phase of looking at this that, you're already jumping to, well, what's the rule? And gee, I think we're going to be spending a lot of time talking about that issue, and I don't have an answer for it right now.
There are a lot of models out there, though, and there's a very nice map in the report that shows sort of which states and countries manage groundwater and surface water together from a legal perspective, and which don't. And California is one of the few that doesn't. So, yeah, Alvar.
Now, I want to add about that. We are always talking about Colorado and this issue on groundwater, on return flows and all that. And we were thinking about why is that? And this is because litigation, because the compacts, interstate compacts, they're doing that because they need to recharge their neighbors. The same with Nebraska, Kansas, and other states. They have really good groundwater modeling stuff. And about your question about the future, probably if we don't agree on accounting standards on issues, we'll have the same between GSAs in the future. You could be blaming your upstream groundwater sustainability agency because you are not having enough recharge. So that's one thing to think about. And this is because of that why Colorado is doing that so well. It's not because they want, it's because they have a problem downstream.
And they have more water lawyers, I think, than the rest of the country combined. But just a quick comment on that. I think there are methods to estimate your contribution or impacts on stream flows. There are also evidential ways that you can show that your pumping over a period is not impacting streams more than others, more than previously. And I think the way the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act is built, it's local control. There's going to be some testing of different methods initially, some back and forth with the board and others about what is compelling evidence, et cetera. And my suspicion is that there will be a few tests that don't work and don't work that well, and a couple of do, and there will be a development of a sort of a standard protocol that will come out of a discourse that works in one area and perhaps better another protocol that might work in another area. But the science is there to show whether your impact on stream flow is more or less than it was in the past. It's a little muddy, like a lot of the measurements and management of groundwater, but there's methods. It's just going to take a little wrestling in the next several years, I think.
Michael.
I think it's interesting how much we have talked about funding an improved accounting system, and in that discussion we go immediately to the really thorny policy issues. And so when Jay says most of the accounting is already being paid for and what we need is a state system, or when Tom and Maurice talk about trying things, getting that information, and then moving forward, I think it does go back to the issue of trust. A lot of the people who are creating this information, who are controlling it, do not want the state to have it because they know that new public trust flows are going to come out of what they think of is their wallet that they're accounting for. And so the issues of how do we pay for this? What's the model for paying for it? We've given authority to the groundwater management agencies to raise the funding that they need, but we haven't crossed this trust issue in terms of how the information will be used when it is amalgamated and used on a statewide policymaking basis. There was a question in there somewhere, I'm sure.
No, I don't think so, Michael.
Well, I guess, I mean,
Yeah,
people,
go ahead.
to be blunt, a person who's pumping and who has not been reporting what their extractions have been, or is thinking probably to themselves, wow, I'm going to get taxed to pay to build a gun that's going to be pointed back at me, and then 5, 10 years after the study's done, I'm going to get shot. That's really the fear. I mean, that's because we see it all the time. It's a very common concern, and I think probably sometimes you get less, but you do get that you eliminate that uncertainty. Eventually, people are going to find out. I mean, you can run again, like when we do our quantification of water. If you don't want to put on a meter, we can go get your electrical records. If we can't get your electrical records, we'll just fly over your house with an infrared camera and take a snapshot of what you're irrigating, and tell you what your water use is. There's ways to, the jig is up eventually. And the thing is, bring everybody to the table, and part of this process that's really important is that you just lay the facts out on the table and you look for the win-wins. And sometimes, the environment, it's a little more weighted there. Other times there's concessions. If I get this, I get this. And sometimes there's creative solutions. Maybe some of those flows in the river can be return flows from water that's treated to a certain point. So instead of going out to the ocean with the sewer system, it goes over here. Possibly with that certainty, with additional imported water, a certain fraction can be put back into the river. Possibly, I'll give you a quick example from my area. We have a beautiful riparian corridor that was getting sucked dry and dying due to decades of overdraft. A gorgeous area in the Mojave River. Very few of these ephemeral riparian areas in the stream that disappears daylights and then dives, mostly a dry river. There's some very beautiful oases in there that were dying. Fish and Wildlife was legitimately extremely concerned. We could either dump a bunch of state project water in the river and then have this basically a big sprinkler system to go out there and keep this riparian area alive, but we actually partnered with everybody and said, okay, what do we need to do? We need to hit certain groundwater levels at certain times of year so the roots are always wet. And also, by the way, there's a lot of tamarisk in here. We realize that the place is full of invasive species. So putting very expensive imported water into this riparian area that was just going to grow more invasive species as we water them more with water we don't have, it was going to exacerbate the problem. So we decided to not import the water. We're going to kind of control pumping, pull it off river if we can, give incentives, and pay the local resource conservation district a partnership working with the Bureau to go out and eradicate the tamarisk and salt cedar. And it took years, a lot of heavy equipment moving out. Beautiful, lush, looks like, I wouldn't be surprised if I go out there tomorrow and there's a unicorn in there. It's just absolutely gorgeous. And it's a real asset. And it was a solution. We actually made water by removing an invasive species that wasn't even part of the discussion because we didn't get everybody at the table to really talk about the facts and, man, is there an easier way to do this? And those types of things don't happen unless you have the data to at least talk about, at least in my opinion. Get the data, bring everybody up at the table without an agenda, and see if you can come up with a win-win. So it's got to be transparent, it's got to be collaborative, because it's people's lives. This is really a serious business, and people are impassioned for good reason. It will affect them. So a lot of times there's a lot of creative solutions out there. There's a lot of partners with other government entities and cities and whatnot that can do these win-wins, but it doesn't really happen unless you bring the group together. That stakeholder process locally is so important. You can find a lot of win-wins that you'd never imagine. But you can only do that if you get data to talk about.
No, I'll reinforce
that is a very optimistic note. And I just want to say we're at 1:30, so I want to give you other guys each about 30 minutes to say something optimistic. Oh, sorry, 30 seconds. 30 seconds. Optimistic, Maurice. All right?
Yeah, well, responding to that, and if you don't ask a question, then I can assume what your question was. But if your question is how to get over that trust issue, that's there's a lot of different threads of how to get over it. But I do think that if you can get over it, one, good data is a way to help get over it, having an understanding among everyone, the same understanding among everyone of what the condition is. But also, having good information opens up a lot of opportunities that you don't have if you're completely in the defensive mode. The idea of water trading, for instance, is a great example. If you can get to a water trading system where you can use your water rights in different ways, it opens up a lot of opportunities, but you can't enter that if you don't have a good understanding of a situation and you can't actually have accounting of what's happening.
Tom?
I just really say that, having worked in this for, 32 years, that the trajectory is in the right direction. We are doing a lot better than we were in the past, and I'm seeing a lot of improvement moving forward. This particular administration, Governor Brown's administration, has been a very positive one for the environment and for the for improving management of water. And so they've been very supportive, and we've been able to make some progress, and I'm hopeful we'll continue.
Alvar, any last words?
I have to say that most of the things that we have been talking and that we have highlighted in the report are already being more or less implemented somehow in different parts of the state. So it's just the integration and some that are not already being implemented. It will be better to implement it soon, or we will be paying for them later.
Thank you. Well, please join me in thanking these guys. And thanks to all of you. There's no point in doing an event unless you have an engaged audience. So thank you, and have a great rest of your day.